Welcome everybody, it's Rich here in another fast and fun video, and in this week's video I'm going to do something a little bit differently. For some people, buying a second-hand new sports car that is 10, 15, 20 years old is their worst nightmare. For others, they absolutely love it. Well, it's definitely true though that when you're looking at buying an older sports car that will have been used harder in its life, or likely to have been used harder in its life, it is far more risky than buying a normal run-of-the-mill family car. Service history, condition is absolutely paramount when you're looking at buying these older modern classic cars, where colour and spec is less important. Well, this video is going to break down my top 21 tips that I use every time I go to buy one of my modern sports cars, modern classic sports cars. And I've broken it down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is all about the research. Phase 2 is the search for the specific vehicle. And phase 3 is the actual viewing itself. I hope this video is going to be useful. Let's go straight in at number 1. You don't trust anybody. Now, the vast majority of sellers are genuine people, but there are a percentage of sellers that know they are selling cars with problems. And for me, on cars that are 10, 15, 20 year old and they are sports cars, performance cars, that risk is only greater. So please don't believe anybody, don't believe what anybody says, don't take anybody's word for what they say. You need evidence, and that is something that you can see, and whether that is a service history, whether that is a receipt, whether it's something physical with the vehicle, you need to be able to see it, you need to be able to touch it, you need to hear it. Don't believe anybody. Number 2 is make time. And that is for research, and it's for the viewings themselves. Buying a car, second-hand sports car, takes time. You cannot do enough research. You need to understand the market, you need to understand values, you need to understand that particular type of car that you are after. There is a huge amount of information there, and people that are willing to pass on their information to you on the internet. Use that. Join groups, join forums online, and use that intelligence that you can gather to formulate a picture that whether this particular make and model is the right car for you. Time. Are you time constrained? Because viewing cars, doing the research, finding the right cars and doing the viewings takes time. You have to put time aside. If you are time constrained, if you've got a deadline that you have to have the car by and you start to rush, that's where you will make wrong decisions that could financially hurt you. So my number 2 is about time. Be prepared to put time into research, be prepared to put time in for viewings. Number 3 is set a budget. Set a budget and keep to it. And the budget that you set, don't stretch yourself. And I say that because I always suggest at least 25% of your budget should be set aside for servicing, for repairs, for putting things wrong once you have bought the vehicle, and at least giving you a period of enjoying that vehicle. And you also need budget to enjoy the vehicle, especially if it is a second or third car that you are buying for the weekends. Then you want to be able to enjoy that car, and whether that is for fuel or servicing or repairs, or actually weekends away, day trips away, holidays away, those are the memories that you will think of. Not sat in the garage, not sat on the drive, not sat near the house. The memories that you will have, the enjoyment that you have from the car is using it on doing things special with it. And for me, those day trips, those weekends away that you've gone driving, they're the memories. They're what makes owning an older sports car that much more enjoyable. So make sure you set the correct budget. Number 4 is be realistic. So depending on what your budget is will clearly drive both the condition and the history that your vehicle has, as well as what mark of vehicle it is. So set realistic expectations. The research that you've done will help with that. The second part of being realistic is what the purpose of that vehicle is for. If it is your only vehicle and you want an older sports car, can you live with the 2-seater convertible if you've got the dog or children? Or the 3-door hatch? Are baby seats going to really become difficult to get little children in and out of a 2+2? So all these are things that you've got to consider. You must be realistic when you come to assessing what car you're after. Number 5 is a really controversial subject. I don't buy from second-hand car dealers. And I've got many reasons for that, which I'll talk about. There are many really good second-hand car dealers, but unfortunately, like in sellers of private vehicles, there are also sellers through trade, through second-hand dealerships that are unscrupulous and have very bad and poor reputation. If you do, there's some things that I say you must consider. The first one is if you go to a second-hand car dealer, they have to make a profit. They are a business. So you will not get the best deal by going to a second-hand car dealer. 2, warranty. Warranties on most second-hand car dealers are not worth the paper that they are written on. 3, if I had a problem car, I would either do a trade-in or I'd sell it at auction. It's the quickest and easiest way to get rid of that car. That means those cars are in the second-hand car dealerships. They're a flood with those type of cars. 4, you can't meet the previous owner. And when you're looking and viewing a car, viewing the owner is almost as important as the car itself. And 5, garages, second-hand dealerships, they are professionals. And by their very nature, they're very good. If needed, they can cover up problems and issues that you won't uncover until it's at your cost. So once your research has been done, you can then start looking at specific cars. So point 6 is around the photos of the car. You can get a huge amount of information from just looking at those photos. Are the photos of all sides of the car? Left, right, front, and rear? Have you got good enough photos of the inside of the car? Is the car clean? Where have the photos been taken from? A trading estate or actually on a drive or on a street near the person's house? And one really good tip is, do the photos look recent? In other words, if you're buying in July and there's snow on the ground or there's no leaves on the trees, you know the photos aren't recent. So you can ask, I want recent photos. Very often, potential sellers will use old photos to advertise their cars. So you can get a lot of information from just looking at that photo. Once you've looked at the photos, you will have the registration plate. If you haven't, call or message the seller and get the registration plate and use the DVLA MOT history checker. It's free, it's a website, it's free to use. You just type in the registration and it gives you 2 key bits of information. One is the history of the MOTs, going back now about 10 years. What does that do? That provides you all the passes and MOT failures throughout the last 10 years. Where it's failed, it tells you what it's failed on. Where there's been advisories, it gives you those. So if you look at the last couple of MOTs, or certainly the last one in particular, looking at the advisories, it may have passed, but if there's a long list of advisories, you can see what those advisories are. This could be potential cost to you to put these right if the current seller hasn't put them right. So this is bargaining and leverage that you could have with the potential seller when it comes to purchasing the vehicle. The second thing that the DVLA MOT history checker does is mileage, because for every MOT it provides a mileage. So you will have now a bank of mileages going all the way back 10 years up to the current and latest MOT, and you can see, does the mileage align to the service history. Number 8 is the service history. So obviously depending on the value that you're paying for the car will depend on what sort of service history it's got. But if it's been sold as full service history should have a fully stamped service book and backed up by all the associated receipts. Service history is both calendar and mileage based. So if a car has not done the mileage, it should still have servicing based on calendar. So you need to check that. You can do a lot of this prep without viewing the car. You can get the seller of the car to email across photos of the service book and their last few receipts, both for repairs and for servicing. And any genuine seller will be more than happy to do that. If they aren't, I'm just happy to walk away. Once you've got the service book as well, the mileage in that service book should align to the DVLA MOT checker mileage as well. The last car I bought was my Renault Sport Clear 182. Because I was time constrained when I went to view that the first time, I was very open. I said I'm not test driving the car, but because the servicing was so comprehensive, it was an inch thick of 15 years worth of servicing, that it was too much for him to email across. So I actually went across to the house, viewed all the service pack and spent half an hour with all the service history to make sure it was full, it was comprehensive. That gives you assurance that that car's been well maintained. It is really critically important you get that part right for sports cars. Not only will it de-risk your time with the car, but when you come to sell your sports car in some future point, it will also provide a much more comprehensive reason for selling it. You'll get a better price for selling it when it has a robust full service history. Number 9 is make contact with the owner through both phone and messaging. Use both. Both have their pros and cons. Some people just want to use messaging. Some people prefer phone calls. I prefer a mix of both. The benefit of phone calls is you can get a wealth of information in a 5-minute phone call that would take a lot of messages to get there. And on messaging, some things can be interpreted incorrectly, whether on purpose or by accident. On phone calls, you can sense when you ask a question how quick the response is, whether it's real or whether there's a little bit of a underlying problem there that you're trying to detect. So I think having that phone call definitely helps. But there are benefits of messaging, like I talked about on the previous point. You can get photos and images sent across as well that just back up that phone call as well. So my tip is when you make contact with the seller is try to use both means, both email or messaging and phone calls. Number 10 is the car too cheap? If it is, there is a reason for that. By the very nature of being a seller, you want the best maximum price that the market will sustain for you to sell your vehicle. So if a car appears to be too cheap, there will be almost certainly a reason for it. And the cheapest cars are generally the most expensive. So at point, we eventually move into phase 3, which is we get to go to the viewing itself and see the car. One of the first checks I always do is check the tyres. Are these premium branded tyres, or are they some backstreet Chinese knockoff specials? That really does dictate how the car has been looked after and cared for, depending on what rubber the car comes with. And the second point of tyres is, do they match? Especially, ideally all four. On some occasions, as long as the fronts and the rears match, that's okay. But ideally all four are matched branded tyres. If you get to a car that three or all four are brands you've never heard of, they're all mismatched, I'd walk away, because tyres are one of the critical parts of any sports car, and if somebody is willing to cut costs on tyres, they will have almost certainly cut costs elsewhere. Number 12 is only view in the dry. Two main reasons for this. One, if this older sports car that you're viewing has got badly finished paint, that's got swirl marks in, it's got a few scratches in there, the best thing that you want as a seller is for it to rain, because even poor paint looks good when it's wet. So first of all, you want to view the car when it's dry. The second reason is because it's almost impossible to find leaks, drips and problems from under the car if it's wet on the floor. You just won't spot them. You've got two choices. You can ask the seller if they have a garage, if they're willing to put the car in the garage prior to you visiting. That's always an option, and I've used that before. If they haven't, and a lot of sellers don't have that flexibility, then just delay the viewing. If the seller comes back with the cliche that someone is viewing tomorrow trying to put pressure on you to view, accept, fine. If it gets sold, it gets sold, but my strong recommendation is do not view a car when it's wet. Number 13 is, there's nothing worse than I've driven an hour to view a car and I walk up to the car, I put my hand on the bonnet and I can feel warmth. The car's been used, and it's not just been turned over, it's at full operating temperature. I always specifically ask any seller, please don't start the car. I, as a buyer, want to see that car cold. I want to do all the fluid checks cold. I want to check it starting cold. I want to check it running cold. So always check that the engine hasn't been started. If it has been, I don't necessarily discount it, but it is a black mark against the car. Number 14 is when you get to the property, when you get to the car, the seller comes out, he unlocks the car, maybe gives you the keys, and check the locking and unlocking of the car. It's a high percentage of cars that I have viewed have problems with remote central locking, and you can always suggest if a seller doesn't have any issues, he will more than likely hand you the keys to let you unlock the vehicle while you look around the car. So always check your remote central locking, both for locking and for unlocking. Number 15 is checking the fluids. So you need to do your standard health checks of any car, specifically oil and coolant are the key ones. Do it when it's cold, do it when you've come back from the test drive as well, just to make sure there's been no significant fluid loss, that they're all in the relevant minimum and maximum range. And before the drive, it's always worth also checking the oil cap for a milky oil cap. Just be aware that if the car has been stood there for several days or a week or so, it is possible you can get some sort of milky residue on the oil cap where moisture has actually come to the surface if it's been left for a period of time. So don't necessarily discount that. 16 is take a torch. You need a torch, and specifically that's for looking around the engine bay and underneath around the gearbox, and get under the car, get under in the back of the sills, get into the rear arches, have a look at the exhaust. What are you looking for? If you're even not technically orientated, any type of fluid loss is a bad fluid loss. probably without standing aircon just pumping some, releasing some water and some fluid. But largely, you don't want any fluid loss under the car. And corrosion, rust, especially cars now that are 15, 20, 25 years old. And also it depends on the make and model of the car that you are viewing as well. The research you've done in phase 1 will help you know these are the prone areas. The back of the boot, the rear wheel arches, the inner sills, the front and rear subframes. They will paint a picture. This is what you need to check for. Take a torch, it makes it much easier. Number 17 is check inside the car. Just do the simple visual check of the car. Check for scratches, check for marks, check for dinks, check for tears and cuts in the cloth or into the leather seating. Just give it a really good look over. Hand on the car, under the car mats. Check around the footwells as well for moisture, for damp, in case there's any issues with leaky roofs, drainage, etc, etc. So is it clean? Is it tidy? If a car is not clean, if a car is not tidy, if it's got cuts and tears and rips, what else has been neglected? So for me, the inside condition of a car gives a good indication to the condition of the rest of the car. Number 18 is the test drive. Most people that are fully comprehensive can drive another car third party. Most owners will let you drive their car, others will not. And that for me is absolutely okay, and it is absolutely acceptable. You can't expect somebody that's selling a modern classic sports car that could be worth quite a lot of money to have somebody, complete stranger, turn up and within half an hour be driving his pride and joy. So I fully appreciate any sellers out there that will not let others drive. And that's okay. We have to accept that as buyers of these cars. However, on the test drive, ask the owner to do the things that you would do, whether that's hard acceleration, braking, steering, whatever you want to do, getting the car up to national speed limit and things like that. This could be your car within the hour. So you need to ask the current owner to do what you want to do so you're comfortable that the car is driving as intended. Number 19 is take a friend. They don't have to know anything about cars, but sometimes having a second person there can just help. It can just take off a little bit of the pressure if you're asking questions or trying to look at things, and there's a lot for you to think about when you're buying the car, and that just gives you some thinking time if there is a second person there to look at things, to view things, to see things, maybe to look at how the seller is reacting to questions that you're asking or things that you are doing. Once you've come back from the test drive at point 20, it's always important to leave the car idling. It's a good test to see if the car's got any associated issues with overheating, especially if it's been quite a spirited test drive. Leave it for at least a minimum of 5 minutes, and 5 minutes when you're waiting is quite a long time. So once you park the car, leave it idling, go and check other parts around the car. Maybe have a look at the service history. Get back under the car, check for fluid loss, check the temperature on the gauge, make sure there's no overheating at all. And the final point, number 21, is if in doubt, walk away. It's a really hard thing to do, but it is harder to buy the wrong car and pick up the costs associated with putting it right. I once bought a Mark 1 Audi TT 3.2, 3.25 hours away from my house it was. I'd gone out there to view the car. I really liked the car, but I wasn't sure on a couple of bits, so I just walked away. What happened, I went to see 2 more TTs. I realised then that actually the first one I'd seen was the right car. It was only a phone call later, made the phone call, we did the deal over the phone. The following day I went the 3.25 hours back to pick up the car. That's the right way to do. So if in doubt, walk away. If you change your mind, you've already done everything. You've done your viewing, you've done your test drive, you can always phone or message the seller back and do the deal. But at that point, don't make any rash decisions if you're in any doubt. And that's it. That's my 21 hot tips for buying a used modern classic sports car. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, please subscribe, and please stay tuned, because there'll be another video coming up very, very soon.